Hello and welcome back to Maths Recovery with Rebecca. So today we are going to be looking at a second method in how to factorize trinomials. So this method pops up in majority of books, and I feel like teaching this method for me is quite interesting as it's a quicker way to factorize the trinomials, but it's very important for you to understand all your multiplication pairs when it comes to numbers. But before we even start, let's go look at foiling compared to, or when we relate it to trinomial factorizing, because they are inverse operations of each other. So when we FOIL, remember it's first, outer, inner, last. That's what FOIL stands for. So our first, we're going to multiply them and we're going to get 6x squared. Our outers, we're going to multiply them and we're going to get 2x. We're going to multiply our two inners and we get a 9x, and we multiply our two lasts and we get a 3. Okay. And then we're going to put our like terms together, which is just the 9x and the 2x. So what I wanted to show you in this video is that this first term, when in highest order of power, is your firsts multiplied by each other. Then it's your lasts multiplied by each other. And then the middle guy is your outer and your inner added together. Now this is very important when we're going to go look at this first example. Okay. So let's now take the same question, 6x squared plus 11x plus 3, and let's factorize this. Now, there we've got our first. We look at our factor pairs, 6 and 1 and 3 and 2. And then we've got our last, and we look at our factor pairs. So we've got to try and find a minus 11. So what you do is you take your factor pairs of the first, and you take your factor pairs of your last, and you basically do a criss-cross situation. So you go 6 times 3, which is 18, and 1 times 1, which is 1. And we ask ourselves, does that add or subtract or whatever to 11? No, it doesn't. Okay, so let's then try 3 and 3. Well, that's 9. And 2 and 1, that's 2. Am I going to be able to get 11? Yes. What happens if I add them together? There we go. 9 plus 2 is 11. So if we look at this, these would be our two brackets. Your variable will pop here in the front. So our answer is going to be 3x and a 1, and a 2x and a 3. So the question is, how do I get signs? Well, if I multiply these two together, that's going to give me a 2x, right? What did the 2 have to be? Positive. So that means this one's positive. And if I multiply the two outers, that gave me a 9x. Because remember I added them together, and that had to be a plus. So this is an easy example because they're both plus, and they have to be both plus because if you think about them, you're multiplying the loss. So either they both have to be positive or they both have to be negative. Okay, let's look at a next example. So you got the first, and there's our multiplication pairs, and our last, and there's our multiplication pairs. So let's try this. So we've got 10 and 1, 5 and 2. That's what our first piece could be. And I've got 1 and 9 and 3 and 3. So let's go try this. So I'm going to take 10 times 9 and 1 times 1. So remember, it needs to add up to 21. So I've got a 90 and a 1. There's no way that's giving me a 21. Okay, let's look at another number. Here I've got 30 and 3. That's not going to give me 21. You see how this can get quite long. So let's start with our next number. So we've got 5 times 9. And 5 times 9, that's going to give me a 45. And a 2, well, that's not 21. And then let's look at our last one. 5 times 3, that's a 15. And 2 times 3, that's a 6. Well, if I add those together, I'm getting my 21. So there's it over there. So it'll be a 5x and a 3 and a 2x and a 3. And then we multiply the 2 in the middle. That gives me 6. 6 must be positive. In this case, they're both positive. Okay, next one. There's the 2 outer and outer. So we've got our first and our last. Let's go look at factor pairs of 15. So it's 1 and 15, 5 and 3. And on this side, it's going to be 2 and 3 and 1 and 6. And remember, it needs to add up to get a 1. So let's start multiplying. Well, that's going to be 3. 1 times 3 is 3. That's 30. Well, that's not going to give us a 1. Let's look at the next example. 1 and 6, that's a 6. 1 and 15, that's a 15. Well, that's not going to give me 1. Let's go and look at 5 times 3, that's a 15. And 2 times 3, that's a 6. Well, that's not going to give me 1. And then let's go look at 5 times 6. Well, that's 30. And 3 times 1, that's 3. Well, that's also not giving me 1. What else can I do? Well, multiplication pairs 2 times 3 and 3 times 2, same thing. So let's try this. That's going to give me 10. And 3 times 3 is 9. Well, that could probably give me 1. And if I look at this negative, it needs to be a negative and a positive. That's the only things that multiply together. So if I need a positive 1, wouldn't that 10 be a plus and this 9 be a minus? So now there's quite a lot going on here. But if you're following, you should be able to see that's a 5x and a 3. And a 3x and a 2. And we multiply the ones in the middle, that gives me a 9. My 9 had to be negative. And then the 2 outers, well, that gives me 10, and my 10 had to be positive. Great stuff. Next one. Well, there's the inner and the outer. Okay, let's go look at, have I got that middle piece again? Yes, I do. Multiplication pairs of 12, that's 1 and 12, 2 and 3, 6 and 2. That's quite hectic. Okay, multiplication pairs of 10, well, that's 10 and 1 and 10, and 2 and 5. This is quite a lot to get through. And I've got to try and make a minus 2. Okay, let's do this. So that's a 10, and that's a 12. That could probably make a minus 2. Let's check out what our signs need to be. So one needs to be a plus and one needs to be a minus. What if we have a minus 12 and a plus 10? That works. So I've got x, a 1x, and a 1, because now they are my brackets. And I've got a 12x and a 10. That needs to be a minus 12. This needs to be a plus 10. And there we go. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this just brushed up on any technique that you know. And yeah, good luck. Factorizing is a lot of fun.